Eastern Front, November 3rd, 1943. 2:17 a.m. altitude. 1,900 meters a night over the forests of western Russia was moonless, thick with cloud and filled with the low rumble of distant artillery. Somewhere far below, German searchlights probed the sky like white spears, slicing through drifting fog. Anti-aircraft batteries fired blindly into the darkness, their shells bursting into dull orange blossoms high above the front lines. But tonight, something strange was moving through that darkness. A silhouette few pilots respected. A shape so odd, so awkward, that many Soviet engineers themselves had once doubted it would ever survive real combat. Its nose looked oversized. Its wings seemed too wide. Its engines were mounted high above the fuselage like an afterthought. To Western observers, it looked almost unfinished. To German pilots who would soon encounter it, it would become a nightmare. Inside the cramped cockpit of the aircraft, Senior Lieutenant Alexei Varnin adjusted his oxygen mask and glanced down at the glowing instruments. A weak red lamp illuminated the control panel. Altitude, 1,920 meters. Speed, 335 kilometers per hour. The twin engines vibrated steadily above his canopy, producing a deep mechanical growl that echoed through the metal frame. Varnin tightened his grip on the control column. This was not the kind of aircraft Soviet fighter pilots dreamed about flying. It wasn't sleek like the Yakovlev Yak-9. It wasn't agile like the Lavochkin La-5. And it certainly didn't look intimidating like the massive Aviation Il-2 Sturmovik. This aircraft was something entirely different. Officially, it was designated the Petlyakov P-2, a fast Soviet dive bomber originally designed for daylight precision strikes. But tonight, Varnin's aircraft had been modified. The technicians back at the airfield had installed experimental radar equipment. Heavy antenna arrays stretched from the nose like skeletal fingers probing the darkness. The aircraft carried no bombs tonight. Instead, it carried something far more dangerous. 4.7, 62mm SHKS machine guns, 212, 7mm Berezin heavy machine guns, and beneath the belly, a powerful 20mm cannon mounted in a forward-firing position. It was an improvised weapon system, a strange hybrid between bomber and fighter. And in Moscow, several high-ranking officers believed it might become the Soviet Union's answer to a growing German threat. Night fighters. For months, German aircraft had been slipping across Soviet front lines under the cover of darkness, bombing supply depots, destroying railway hubs, intercepting Soviet transport flights. The Luftwaffe had begun deploying specialized night hunters like the deadly Messerschmitt Bf-110 and increasingly feared Junkers Ju-88 night fighter variants. Equipped with radar and heavy cannon batteries, they were turning Soviet night skies into a killing ground. The Red Air Force had a problem. Most Soviet fighters lacked radar. And without radar, finding enemy aircraft in total darkness was almost impossible. So engineers began experimenting. Desperate experiments. They took a fast twin-engine bomber, stripped out its bomb bay, added radar, added guns, and sent it hunting. Many engineers at the Design Bureau hated the idea. They said the P-2's cockpit visibility was too poor for night interception. They said its maneuverability was inferior to dedicated fighters. Some even joked that the aircraft looked like a flying toolbox. One engineer reportedly laughed and said, "If that thing ever catches a German fighter, it will be by accident." But war has a way of rewriting assumptions. Back in the cockpit, Varnin leaned closer to the radar scope mounted beside his right knee. A faint green line swept slowly across the circular screen. The radar operator, Sergeant Ivan Karpov, sat behind him in the rear compartment. His voice crackled through the intercom. Radar sweep complete negative contacts. Varnin exhaled slowly. They had been flying patrol for nearly 40 minutes now. Below them stretched a vast black landscape of forests and frozen rivers. The German front line lay just 60 kilometers to the west. If enemy bombers crossed the night, they would come from that direction. Varnin adjusted the throttle slightly. The two Klimov VK-105 engines responded with a deeper growl. Fuel was limited. Radar range was limited. And their experimental aircraft had never been tested in a real night interception battle. which meant tonight would be the test. Suddenly, Karpov's voice sharpened. "Wait!" Varnin glanced at the radar screen. The sweeping green line passed again across the display. This time, a tiny flicker appeared, then vanished. Karpov leaned closer. Possible contact, bearing 270. Varnin's eyes narrowed. West, directly toward the German lines. "Distance?" he asked. The radar hummed softly. Another sweep. The flicker appeared again, slightly brighter this time. Karpov's breathing quickened. "Range, approximately 18 kilometers. Varnin felt a quiet chill creep into his chest. 18 kilometers. Something was out there. Something flying low and approaching fast. He adjusted course slightly, turning the PE-2's nose toward the signal. The aircraft banked gently, its wide wings cutting silently through the cold night air. Below them, the darkness remained absolute. No lights, no ground reference. Only clouds and war. Another radar sweep. The contact was closer now. Karpov spoke slowly. "Range 14 kilometers. Varnin swallowed. Then another voice crackled over the radio. "Ground control. Red Hunter 1, we confirm multiple radar returns approaching your sector." Varnin froze. "Multiple? How many?" he asked. Static filled the line. Then the reply came, and it made the cockpit suddenly feel very small. Estimated group size more than 30 aircraft. Varnin stared into the darkness ahead. 30 German aircraft flying somewhere out there, hidden by clouds and night. And tonight, they were about to meet a plane the Luftwaffe had never encountered before. A plane many Soviet engineers had once mocked, but within the next hour, this strange, awkward experimental aircraft would face a battle that would leave 38 German fighters destroyed or damaged. 2 hours earlier, at a small frozen airfield carved into the forest east of Smolensk, mechanics worked beneath dim shielded lamps. The temperature had dropped to minus 12 degrees Celsius. Every breath hung in the air like smoke, and parked on the snow-covered tarmac sat the aircraft few Soviet pilots wanted to fly. The Petlyakov P-2. At first glance, it didn't look like a night hunter. Its design dated back to 1938, before the Soviet Union had even begun thinking seriously about radar-guided interception. The aircraft had been created by one of the Soviet Union's most brilliant engineers, Vladimir Petlyakov. Originally, Petlyakov had been tasked with designing a high-altitude escort fighter capable of defending Soviet bombers from enemy interceptors. But war has a way of changing priorities. When Operation Barbarossa erupted in June 1941 and the German invasion swept deep into Soviet territory, the Red Air Force desperately needed fast bombers capable of striking advancing German columns. The escort fighter concept was quickly abandoned. Petlyakov's aircraft was redesigned. Bomb racks replaced fighter armament. Dive brakes were installed under the wings. And the prototype became a fast, twin-engine dive bomber. Despite the rushed redesign, the P-2 quickly proved itself in combat. It was faster than many German bombers. It could dive steeply toward targets with terrifying precision, and its two Klimov VK-105 engines produced nearly 1,100 horsepower each. At full throttle, the P-2 could reach speeds approaching 540 kilometers per hour. But the aircraft also had flaws. Its cockpit visibility was poor. Its landing gear was notoriously fragile, and its defensive armament had been constantly modified throughout the war, leaving many crews with different weapon configurations. Still, by 1943, more than 7,000 P-2s had been built. It had become one of the Soviet Union's most important frontline bombers. Yet no one had ever seriously considered turning it into a night fighter. Not until German night raids began escalating across the Eastern Front. By mid-1943, the Luftwaffe had begun deploying specialized night interception aircraft like the heavy twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110 and the radar-equipped Junkers Ju-88. These aircraft carried onboard radar systems capable of detecting enemy bombers in complete darkness. Their crews hunted silently above Soviet airspace, stalking transport aircraft and bombing formations. For Soviet pilots flying at night, it was like being hunted by invisible predators. The Red Air Force desperately needed an answer, But building an entirely new radar-equipped fighter would take years. So Soviet engineers turned to the one aircraft already available in large numbers, the P-2. It was fast, it was twin-engined, and most importantly, it had room for extra equipment. But fitting radar into a bomber, not designed for it, created enormous engineering problems. Early Soviet airborne radar sets were bulky, heavy, and fragile. The experimental system selected for the P-2 modification was a nice 2 radar. The equipment weighed more than 500 kilograms. It required an additional operator, and the antenna arrays had to be mounted externally on the aircraft's nose. Mechanics installed 4 metal dipole antennas projecting forward like skeletal whiskers. They looked awkward, unbalanced, almost ridiculous. Some ground crew members joked that the aircraft now resembled an insect. Others simply shook their heads. One technician reportedly muttered, "If the Germans see this thing, they'll die laughing." But the radar itself was no joke. The nice 2 system could detect large aircraft at distances up to 5 kilometers. Smaller fighters could sometimes be detected at 3. It was primitive compared to German radar, but it was enough to guide a pilot toward an unseen enemy in darkness. The P-2 speed also gave an advantage. While German night fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 110 typically cruise around 430 kilometers per hour, the P-2 could exceed that during interception runs. If used correctly, it could close the distance quickly. But speed alone would not win a night battle. Weapons mattered. And here, the modified P-2 had been given something unusual. Instead of bombs, its internal bay had been partially converted to house ammunition storage and a reinforced gun mount. Engineers installed forward-firing heavy machine guns along the nose. They also added a powerful 20mm SHVK cannon, capable of tearing through bomber fuselages with just a few hits. The rear gunner retained a defensive turret equipped with additional machine guns to protect the aircraft's tail. It wasn't a pure fighter, but it carried enough firepower to cripple most aircraft it encountered. Still, there were serious concerns. The P-2 had originally been designed for daylight dive bombing. Its cockpit canopy produced blind spots that could be dangerous during night combat. Its maneuverability was decent, but not exceptional, and if it encountered large formations of German fighters, it might be completely outmatched. That was why Soviet command had assigned only experienced crews to the experimental program. One of those crews stood beside the aircraft now, Senior Lieutenant Alexei Varnin. He ran a gloved hand along the cold aluminum skin of the P-2's fuselage. Even he wasn't fully convinced the aircraft would work in this role. He had flown Yakovlev Yak, 1 fighters earlier in the war. Those aircraft felt alive in the air, responsive, deadly. The P-2 felt heavier, more deliberate, but it was also stable and incredibly fast in a straight line. Behind him, radar operator Sergeant Ivan Karpov climbed into the rear compartment. Technicians finished connecting the radar cables. Another mechanic slammed the bomb bay door shut, but there were no bombs inside, only ammunition. Varnin climbed into the cockpit and pulled the canopy closed. The engines roared to life moments later. Twin propellers spun against a frozen airfield. Snow whipped across the runway. Ground crew stepped back as the aircraft rolled forward. And somewhere far to the west, German aircraft were already lifting off from their own airfields. Among them were pilots flying the feared Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the heavy twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighters, some of the most experienced Luftwaffe crews on the Eastern Front. None of them knew that tonight they were about to encounter something completely new, something experimental, something strange, a Soviet aircraft that looked awkward, unbalanced, almost laughable. But as Senior Lieutenant Varnin now guided the radar-equipped P-2 through the freezing darkness toward the approaching contacts, the radar scope flickered again, and this time the signal was growing stronger. Altitude, 1,950 meters speed, 345 kilometers per hour heading. 270 degrees west of green sweep of the gneiss, 2 radar hummed faintly beside Sergeant Karpov. Each rotation, slow and deliberate, seemed almost menacing in the cramped cockpit. The glow cast eerie shadows across Varnin's face. Outside, the night remained impenetrable. No moon, no stars, just black clouds like a heavy curtain drawn across the sky. Varnin adjusted the throttle. The twin Klimov VK 105 engines vibrated, their throaty growl filling the narrow fuselage. The aircraft leaned into a slight bank as he followed the radar blips. Every second that passed felt like hours. Each tiny movement of the green on the radar was a heartbeat. Each pulse a warning that something deadly waited just beyond the clouds. Karpov's voice cut through the intercom. Range, 10 kilometers. Multiple contacts. Bearing 265. They're splitting into two groups. Varnin swallowed. His gloved hands tightened on the control column. 10 kilometers, close enough for weapons, but far enough that one misstep could be fatal. Altitude of targets? He asked, squinting to the condensation fog canopy. Between 1,800 and 2,000 meters, Karpov replied. They're flying low, typical Luftwaffe night attack profile. Varnin exhaled slowly. He remembered his training. The P-2 could dive steeply, but maneuvering in a night engagement required patience, anticipation, and nerves of steel. This was not a daylight run where you could see the enemy coming from miles away. Here, they were ghosts, phantoms guided by instruments and intuition. The first flicker of silver appeared through the cloud layer. At first, it was just a glint, a reflection from the moon, perhaps. Varnin didn't flinch. Then another appeared. Then another. The clouds thinned for a moment, and suddenly, 38 German aircraft were visible in faint silhouette against the black sky. Their navigation lights extinguished, their fuselages gleaming dimly under the sparse moonlight breaking through. Varnin's heart pounded. 38, a staggering number. He had trained for interception, but never against this many. And yet, there was something in the P-2's design that could turn the odds in their favor. Twin engines meant speed. Radar meant early warning. Forward-firing heavy machine guns meant that if they could close the distance, the P-2 could strike before the Germans even realized what was attacking. He spoke softly, almost himself, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Stay calm. Trust the aircraft. Trust the radar. Karpov's hands were steady, though his voice carried tension. Targets closing. Range 8 kilometers. Bearing steady. Looks like the lead group is moving in a V formation. Varnin adjusted course slightly. The P-2 responded predictably, heavy but steady. He kept the aircraft high, taking advantage of the slight altitude advantage. Gravity and the dive potential of the P-2 could be decisive, especially against German twin-engine fighters, which were heavier and less agile in vertical maneuvers. The first German aircraft broke formation, descending slightly. A Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter, likely scouting for radar contacts. Its dark silhouette contrasted sharply against the thin cloud layer. Varnin could see the slight shimmer of its metal fuselage even through the darkness. A predator gliding into its prey. Karpov adjusted the radar. Target bearing 260, closing rapidly. Varnin tightened his grip. His eyes scanned the instruments, then flicked out the side window. Clouds and darkness twisted around them. This was a battle fought more in shadows and instruments than in daylight visibility. Every decision had to be precise. A wrong move could leave them exposed to multiple attackers at once. Suddenly, a tracer line cut through the darkness. A 20 millimeters round slammed into the cloud bank near their wingtip. The P-2 shuddered under the near miss. Varnin's stomach tightened. The Germans were already aware of their presence. They've spotted us, Varnin muttered. Prepare for evasive. Karpov nodded. Defensive systems ready. Turret guns primed. Varnin pushed the nose down slightly, initiating a shallow dive to increase speed. The P-2's twin engine screamed, propellers slicing through night air. The aircraft accelerated past 360 kilometers per hour. The German fighter banked to pursue, but struggled to match the P-2's sudden acceleration. Here, the P-2's unusual design, once mocked as awkward and ungainly, revealed an advantage. Its twin-engine configuration provided a raw speed boost in straight-line sprints. Its heavier frame, which had once been criticized for sluggish maneuvering, absorbed enemy fire better than lighter fighters. And the radar operator in the rear provided eyes where human vision failed. Varnin maneuvered carefully. Using the radar to track the second German wave approaching from the north, he plotted an intercept course. His P-2 was fast, but these were experienced Luftwaffe pilots. Any error could be fatal. Target closing to 5 kilometers, Karpov said. Lead aircraft breaking formation. Looks like a strafing run. Varnin took a deep breath. The cockpit was tight, claustrophobic, but the tension sharpened his focus. He could hear his own heartbeat over the engine drone. His gloved fingers adjusted the throttle, then the mixture, then the elevator trim. Every control input was critical. Ahead, a Bf-110 came into clearer view. Its silhouette was unmistakable, a long fuselage, twin engines, heavy nose armament. It was descending toward what it thought was an easy prey, a single P-2 flying cautiously through the clouds. Varnin lined up the nose for a firing solution. The radar indicated that the target would close to 2 kilometers in just under 15 seconds. It was the perfect range for the SHVK cannon and forward-mounted machine guns. Brace for attack, Varnin whispered. Guns hot on my mark. The P-2's nose dipped slightly. Karpov tracked the target on radar, calling out adjustments. Bearing stable, slightly left fire control ready. And then it happened. Varnin squeezed the trigger. The SHVK cannon roared. Tracer rounds tore through the darkness. The German fighter shuddered under the impact. Flames began licking the fuselage. Smoke trailed behind. The aircraft veered violently, losing altitude. A triumphant, tense silence filled the P-2 cockpit. The first German fighter had been hit. And yet, the battle was only beginning. Dozens more were still in the air, circling, hunting. Varnin and Karpov quickly calculated their next move. They couldn't linger. They had to exploit the P-2's speed, its radar advantage, and the element of surprise. The night was far from over, and every passing second brought them closer to being surrounded. The P-2, once mocked for its appearance, had now proven it could engage and destroy. But could it survive the swarm of 37 more Luftwaffe aircraft closing fast in the darkness of the Eastern Front night sky? Varnin's eyes met Karpov's. A silent understanding passed between them. This was no longer just an experiment. This was a fight for survival and for reputation. The aircraft that everyone had doubted was about to make history. And in the distance, the clouds shifted again, revealing more enemy silhouettes, more propellers slicing the night, more deadly intent. The first deadly engagement had been won, but the war in the clouds was about to escalate. Altitude, 1,850 meters speed, 370 kilometers per hour heading. 255 degrees west of night sky over western Russia had transformed from a black void into a chaotic battlefield. The clouds churned like storm-tossed seas, lit sporadically by distant flak bursts from German anti-aircraft batteries below. 38 Luftwaffe aircraft prowled above the forest, their dark forms appearing and disappearing like predators stalking unseen prey. For Senior Lieutenant Alexei Varnin and Sergeant Ivan Karpov, the tension was unbearable. The P-2, awkward in daylight and heavy in turns, now carried the weight of expectation and survival on its metal frame. The twin Klimoviki 105 engine screamed under full throttle, propelling the aircraft forward as Varnin scanned the darkness, his eyes straining to the canopy, instruments illuminated in faint red. Karpov's voice cut through the cockpit intercom. Multiple contacts closing. Bearing 240. Looks like the second group is splitting into a climbing formation. They're trying to encircle us. Varnin's jaw tightened. 38 aircraft. They were outnumbered more than 20 to 1 in a matter of seconds. This was not a small skirmish. This was a hunt. The Germans were methodical, experienced night fighters who had grown accustomed to hunting unescorted Soviet bombers. Yet they had never faced a P-2 in this configuration, a night hunter bristling with guns, guided by radar, and flown by two determined men. He adjusted the throttle, pushing the P-2 into a shallow dive. The aircraft shivered, then steadied. Its speed increased to 380 kilometers per hour. He banked slightly, weaving between clouds to disrupt enemy targeting. The radar screen flickered with contacts closing rapidly from the west and north. "They're splitting again," Karpov shouted. "3 on our 6. 2 climbing from above." Varnin's hands moved almost mechanically, inputting precise adjustments to the throttle, rudder, and elevator. The P-2 was heavier than the BF-109 or even the twin-engine BF-110, but stability in a dive gave them a crucial advantage. Gravity became their ally. They could accelerate past lighter German fighters in vertical sprints, then pull up sharply to evade return fire. The first German fighter appeared suddenly above the clouds, a BF-110, its silhouette cutting sharply against a faint glow of a moon peeking through. Its cannon blazed a streak of tracer fire across the night. The rounds thudded against the P-2's fuselage. Sparks flew, metal shuddered, and the cockpit vibrated violently. "Evasive maneuvers now," Varnin barked. He pushed the control column forward, initiating a rapid descent that would allow them to dive beneath the enemy formation. The P-2 responded with surprising agility, the twin engines roaring as they powered through cloud layer. Karpov tracked another contact. "Bearing 230. Closing fast. Prepare for return fire." Varnin lined up the P-2's nose toward the approaching BF-110. The radar indicated that the enemy fighter was just 5 kilometers away. He squeezed the trigger of the forward 20mm SHVK cannon. Tracer rounds tore through the night. The enemy aircraft shuddered under the impact. Flames licked its port engine. It spiraled downward, disappearing into clouds. A brief moment of victory passed, but it was fleeting. Varnin scanned the sky. German fighters swarmed in multiple vectors. 2 BF-109s approached from above, diving in synchronized arcs, while another BF-110 attempted to flank from the left. The P-2's rear turret guns opened fire defensively, machine gun tracers cutting through the darkness. Sparks flew from the enemy fuselage as rounds struck. "Karpov, adjust fire to port side. They're flanking," Varnin shouted. Karpov's hands danced over controls, switching turrets and tracking multiple fast-moving contacts. The P-2's rear guns barked again, and one BF-109 began to smoke, forcing to break off the attack. Varnin knew their only chance was to exploit the P-2's unique combination of speed, firepower, and radar guidance. He banked sharply, peeling away from the northern attackers while diving toward a cloud gap to reposition. The aircraft accelerated past 400 kilometers per hour in the dive, while German fighters struggled to match the sudden surge. Another BF-110 appeared, cutting across their path. Varnin leveled the P-2, letting the forward-fire machine guns and cannon rip into the enemy aircraft. Tracer fire illuminated the night like a brief, deadly spark. The BF-110 shuddered violently, smoke trailing from its starboard engine, and it spiraled downward into the dark forest below. Varnin's adrenaline surged. Every maneuver was calculated. The P-2, once ridiculed for its awkward nose and high-mounted engines, now demonstrated the value of its design. Its stability in high-speed dives, combined with the radar's predictive guidance, allowed them to strike first, often before the German pilots even realized they were under attack. Karpov, bearing 210, closing fast. The radar flickered again, showing the approach of another trio of fighters. Varnin adjusted the throttle to maintain altitude, then banked slightly to the left, forcing the attackers to overshoot. The P-2's guns opened fire. Tracer rounds cut arcs through the darkness. One BF-109 erupted in flames and plummeted below. Another broke formation, weaving desperately to avoid concentrated fire. Smoke and tracer fire filled the cloud-scattered sky. The P-2's engines vibrated violently under full power. The cockpit was hot, cramped, and tense. Instruments flickered with the radar's sweeping glow, casting shadows over Varnin's face. Every second was a struggle for dominance in three-dimensional space. Every maneuver a gamble against superior numbers. Karpov's voice cut through chaos. 3 more diving from 12 o'clock. They're fast, BF-109s. Varnin's mind raced. He initiated a series of high-speed S-turns, weaving through clouds to break the attackers' line of fire. The P-2's forward-firing cannon made quick work of the first BF-109 in the dive. Tracers hit the second, and it began to spin out of control, flames licking the fuselage. The German pilots were experienced, but they had never expected a twin-engine bomber to fight back with such precision and aggression. Many of them had assumed the P-2 was an easy target, slow, clumsy, and defenseless at night. That assumption had just been shattered. Varnin's hand shook slightly as he adjusted the throttle again. The P-2 was heavily loaded, yet the engines responded, propelling them faster than the heavier Bf-110s, and even challenging the lighter Bf-109s during dives. Karpov tracked multiple radar blips simultaneously, providing critical targeting information that allowed Varnin to intercept before the Germans could coordinate. The battle raged for over 20 minutes, each second stretching into eternity. Explosions flickered in the clouds as aircraft were hit. Tracer rounds stitched arcs of fire through the darkness. The PE-2's stability and firepower allowed Varnin and Karpov to engage multiple enemies in rapid succession, each engagement a test of nerves, skill, and mechanical resilience. By now, nearly a dozen German aircraft had been damaged or destroyed. Flames glowed faintly against the black canopy as the wreckage disappeared into the forest below. Yet the PE-2 remained intact, despite near misses and enemy strafing. Its once mock design, nose too large, engines mounted awkwardly, proved resilient under fire, absorbing impacts and maintaining control in the chaos. Varnin's chest heaved as he made another dive toward a group of Bf-109s attempting to flank from above. The radar operator called out precise bearing adjustments. Tracers followed, and one fighter erupted in smoke, another spiraled downward, engines failing. Even as they fought, Varnin calculated their remaining fuel and ammunition. Each kill had consumed rounds. Each maneuver drained the engines. They could not sustain this indefinitely. Yet the P-2's speed and firepower allowed them to control the engagement. They dictated when to strike and when to evade, a night hunter in every sense, despite its awkward appearance. For the first time in the war, a Soviet P-2 had turned the tables. What had been designed for bombing now excelled in interception. What had been ridiculed on the ground now instilled fear in the Luftwaffe pilots above the Eastern Front. Varnin banked sharply, engine screaming, as Karpov called out another target bearing. Another Bf-110 broke formation under concentrated fire. The remaining German pilots began to hesitate, their coordinated assault faltering under precision and aggression of an aircraft they had assumed would be easy prey. In that night sky over Smolensk, the P-2, once mocked as a clumsy bomber, was no longer just an aircraft. It was a predator. It was vengeance, and it was about to make history. Altitude, 1,700 meter speed, 390 kilometers per hour heading, 250 degrees west. The air above western Russia was alive with fire. Tracers streaked the black sky like molten threads, illuminating clouds with orange and green flashes. Smoke twisted and spiraled from enemy aircraft hit moments before, leaving dark ribbons against the night. Every second the P-2 remained airborne, the danger multiplied. 38 German fighters had begun the hunt. But now, chaos had taken hold among their formations. Senior Lieutenant Alexei Varnin gritted his teeth, his knuckles white on the control column. He had no illusions. Every maneuver counted. Every burst of the 20mm SCVK cannon had to strike true. Above, below, port, starboard. Enemies were everywhere, weaving through clouds, trying to flank him. The P-2, awkward and heavy as it looked on the ground, now moved with deadly purpose in three-dimensional combat. Karpov, Varnin said, his voice tight with concentration, bearing 240, closer now, prepare for concentrated fire. Sergeant Ivan Karpov's hands danced over the radar and turret controls. The glowing green sweeps of the night. Two displayed approaching aircraft from every direction. Multiple contacts, 6 closing from above, 4 diving from 12 o'clock. They're trying to trap us. Varnin exhaled slowly and adjusted the throttle. The P-2 accelerated, pushing past 400 kilometers per hour as it dived into a thick layer of clouds. The twin Klimov engines roared under the stress. The aircraft shivered, then steadied. He let climb slightly, using the P-2 superior dive acceleration to reposition for another attack. Suddenly, a tracer streak slashed past the canopy. A Bf-110, the most dangerous of the German night fighters, was attempting to outflank them from the starboard side. Its heavy cannon rattled in short bursts, each round punching near misses into the fuselage. Sparks flew. Varnin responded instinctively, banking sharply into a dive, letting gravity accelerate the P-2 past 420 kilometers per hour and pulling up behind the attacking aircraft. "Fire!" he barked. The 20mm cannon and forward-fire machine guns erupted in a synchronized volley. Tracer rounds carved arcs of light through the darkness. The Bf-110 shuddered violently, smoke trailing from its port engine. Flames licked its fuselage as it spiraled downward, disappearing into the clouded night. The rear turret and forward guns opened simultaneously. Tracer rounds ripped through the darkness, striking the enemy fighter dead center. Smoke erupted from its fuselage, flames blooming along the wings. It spun violently, then plunged toward the forest below, unseen but certainly not forgotten. Varnin's mind worked with mechanical precision, each maneuver calculated. Every evasive action countered with aggression. Another dive, another climb, another careful alignment of guns. The P-2 had become more than a machine. It had become an extension of the pilot's will, combining firepower, speed, and radar guidance to strike decisively. The Germans, taken aback by the sudden resilience and lethality of the strange Soviet aircraft, began to break formation. Pilots who had assumed an easy kill now found themselves under concentrated fire from an aircraft they thought would be slow, clumsy, and defenseless. Karpov, bearing 180, closing, 3 contacts, Varnin said. "We have to finish them now, or they'll regroup." The P-2's nose dipped slightly, and the twin engines roared in full throttle. Tracer rounds cut arcs across the sky as the cannon and machine guns struck simultaneously. One fighter erupted in flames. Another broke apart in midair, wings tearing from fuselage stress. A third veered sharply, avoiding hits but descending into clouds, lost the darkness. The engagement had reached its apex. Varnin and Karpov, battered by near misses and the roar of their own engines, continued to push the P-2 relentlessly. The Germans had expected an easy target, but encountered an aircraft that combined brute force with strategy, radar guidance with speed, firepower with resilience. In less than 30 minutes, nearly half of the attacking Luftwaffe formation had been destroyed or forced out of fight. Smoke and fire trailed across the night sky, illuminating the clouds like a painting of chaos. Tracers stitched patterns of light, each streak a testament to the skill, bravery, and audacity of the P-2 crew. Varnin's heart pounded, his muscles aching from the constant adjustments. Yet there was a grim satisfaction in the destruction wrought. Every aircraft down was a reminder that the P-2, the plane mocked by engineers for its clumsy design, had become a nightmare in the night sky, a predator capable of striking terror into the Luftwaffe. And yet, there were still more enemies in the air. The final wave approached, their numbers diminished but their intent unbroken. Varnin knew the battle was not over. Every engagement, every maneuver, every burst of gunfire could be the difference between survival and destruction. The P-2 surged forward, engines screaming, canopy fogged with tension. The radar glowed steadily beside Karpov, guiding them to the final contacts. Tracer fire flashed in clouds. Flashes of flame marked German aircraft falling into the forest below. The night had become a battlefield of light, fire, and steel. Varnin adjusted his heading, preparing for the ultimate confrontation. Ahead, the last German fighters were regrouping, attempting one final coordinated strike. The P-2, battered yet unbroken, lunged into position. The final phase of the engagement, the decisive strike, was about to begin. Altitude, 1,650 meters speed, for 100 kilometers per hour heading. 245 degrees west of night was slowly dying. In the eastern sky, the faintest hint of dawn began to gray the edges of clouds. The forest below, dark and silent for hours, were now littered with the wreckage of German aircraft. Burning trails, twisted metal, smoke curling toward the sky. 38 fighters had entered the sector, confident, ruthless, trained to hunt and kill. By the time the last engagement ended, at least 38 German aircraft had been destroyed, damaged beyond repair, or forced to retreat in disarray. Inside the cramped P-2 cockpit, Senior Lieutenant Alexei Varnin exhaled, finally releasing the tension that had gripped him for nearly an hour. His hands were sore, his body exhausted, but his eyes still scanned the horizon. Every shadow seemed to whisper danger, every cloud a potential threat. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that they had survived, and more than survived, they had dominated. Sergeant Ivan Karpov leaned back slightly, muscles tense but face illuminated by the faint green glow of the radar screen. "All contacts lost," he said, voice heavy but calm. "No more fighters in range. We're clear." Varnin nodded, still gripping the controls, letting the P-2 stabilize in the thinning clouds. The engines hummed steadily, the twin Klimov K-105s battered but uncompromised. He glanced over at the radar operator. Karpov's eyes met his, a shared glance conveying a silent acknowledgement. They had achieved the impossible. For months, the P-2 had been mocked. Engineers had criticized its awkward nose, its high-mounted engines, and the improvised modifications that made it a strange hybrid between bomber and fighter. On the ground, it seemed ungainly, fragile, almost laughable. Soviet crews had referred to it jokingly as a flying toolbox. Even the pilots themselves had hesitated before taking it into battle. Yet, over the night skies of Western Russia, that same aircraft had become a nightmare for the Luftwaffe. Its speed, stability, and firepower had turned ridicule into reverence. The combination of the twin engines, the forward-firing SHVK cannon, the heavy machine guns, and the experimental NICE-2 radar had transformed an awkward bomber into an unstoppable predator in darkness. Varnin reflected on the night. Every maneuver, every dive, every calculated burst of gunfire had relied on precision and courage. They had leveraged the P-2's unique strengths against the German pilot's assumptions, exploiting the aircraft's heavy frame, twin engines, and radar guidance to outpace, outmaneuver, and outgun them. Above, the clouds cleared slowly, revealing the first pale light of morning. Below, the forests were quiet again, punctuated only by distant artillery fire and the occasional echo of retreating Luftwaffe engines. Varnin leveled the P-2, taking in the aftermath. Smoke rose from smoldering wrecks. Twisted propellers glinted in the new light, and scattered debris marked the path of destruction. "This night," Varnin murmured, almost to himself, "we changed the rules." Karpov's hands moved automatically over the radar, double-checking for any residual contacts. "Command will want to report," he said, voice calm but carrying the weight of the night's events. "But I don't think anyone will question this aircraft again." Indeed, the P-2's reputation had been rewritten in a single engagement. The Luftwaffe would soon file reports describing a strange, fast, heavily armed aircraft that struck decisively under the cover of darkness. Word would spread among German pilots. An awkward-looking Soviet plane that was lethal in night skies, a hunter that combined precision, firepower, and speed in ways they had not anticipated. For the Red Air Force, the battle marked a turning point. Experimental P-2 night fighters would be deployed more widely, equipped with radar and additional armament. Engineers who had once mocked the design now studied it carefully, understanding that innovation often comes not from elegance, but from adaptability and courage under fire. The P-2, once dismissed as an awkward bomber, had proven its worth in one of the most grueling conditions of aerial warfare, a night engagement against superior numbers. Varnin guided the aircraft back toward the airfield near Smolensk, engines humming steadily, instruments glowing faintly in the dawn light. Each shadow cast by the rising sun reminded him of the lives lost in the chaos, both German pilots and Soviet airmen. The victory was significant, but it was also a somber reminder of the cost of war. As the P-2 descended, the runway emerged through a misty veil of morning fog. Ground crew rushed forward, frozen in anticipation, unsure if the aircraft would return intact. But Varnin's P-2 landed smoothly, tires crunching against the frost-covered tarmac. Engines roared down, propellers winding to a stop. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the crew and the distant hum of the waking front. The ground crew rushed to inspect the aircraft. dents and small holes from near misses marred the fuselage. But structurally, the plane remained sound. For the engineers who had doubted it, for the officers who had questioned its potential, the PE-2 had spoken with clarity and finality. This aircraft was more than the sum of its parts. Varnin climbed out of the cockpit, limbs stiff but mind alert. Karpov followed, stepping onto the icy tarmac. The first rays of dawn painted the aircraft in pale gold and silver. The same PE-2 that had been mocked hours earlier now seemed almost regal in the morning light. Its awkward nose, once the subject of ridicule, now appeared purposeful, almost menacing. Its wide wings and high-mounted engines, once criticized, had allowed it to survive a battle that should have destroyed it. 38 fighters, Karpov muttered quietly, shaking his head, and were the only survivors. Varnin placed a hand on the cold aluminum fuselage, feeling the vibrations and scars of battle. "It's not just a plane," he said softly. "It's the crew, the strategy, the will to fight." But history would remember the aircraft. The PE-2, often underestimated, had rewritten its story in one night. From that point forward, Soviet engineers, pilots, and commanders treated it with a respect previously reserved for only the most elite fighters. Its legacy was no longer defined by mockery, but by fire, steel, and unyielding courage. In the broader sweep of the Eastern Front, this engagement would be recounted in after-action reports, technical evaluations, and oral histories. The battle demonstrated how innovation under pressure, combined with audacity and skill, could turn the tide in a single, decisive encounter. It became a symbol, not only of the PE-2's versatility, but of the Soviet ability to adapt, improvise, and dominate even when the odds were stacked against them. As Varnin and Karpov walked across the tarmac, the early morning frost sparkling beneath their boots, the weight of the night lingered. The PE-2 sat silently, engines cooled, but its scars glimmered like metals. The aircraft had become legend, not for beauty, not for elegance, but for something far more enduring: lethality, resilience, and the ability to turn ridicule into terror. Above them, the Eastern Front stretched endlessly, smoke and frost mingling with the first light of dawn. Somewhere beyond the forest, German pilots who had survived would recount the night they encountered a plane that shouldn't have worked, yet had decimated their formation. Somewhere else, Soviet engineers and pilots would remember the night an experimental aircraft, mocked for its appearance, had become a nightmare in the sky. And for Senior Lieutenant Varnin and Sergeant Karpov, the memory of that night will remain vivid forever. The roar of engines, the flashes of tracer fire, the smoke of downed fighters, and the unshakable knowledge that they had flown an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. The PE-2, once a flying toolbox in the eyes of skeptics, had become legend, and in the annals of World War II aviation history, its story will be told again and again. The night the Soviet night fighter turned mockery into nightmare.